Sasha Morgenthaler, 1893 to 1975, was born into a very wealthy family. From a very young age, she loved doing artwork, especially drawing. Paul Klee, a well-known artist, often visited the Morgenthaler house and noted 9-year-old Sasha's drawings. He supported her interest and convinced her parents to send her to the School of Fine Arts in Geneva. At art school, Sasha met Ernst Morgenthaler, an artist. Here he is seen in a self-portrait. They married, and while both pursuing an art career, lived quite a bohemian life for a while. They lived in tents and washed their clothing in the nearby river. And you have to remember, she had servants. She was from a very wealthy family. Sasha, as an adult, is pictured with her cat. She was always a lover of animals. Her love of animals further started her in making stuffed animals for her children. These are just two of many. While in school, Sasha developed a love of sculpture from her teacher, Karl Krauser. She began making mannequins that also helped her learn sewing. These became her livelihood as stores used them as display pieces. Bed dolls were popular at the time. This is one that she made for herself and represents Perriot. Dolls took on an interest when she had children. She wanted to create a doll that didn't reflect any particular emotion. Her memories were of a childhood doll that smiled at her when she was upset. She was so mad at it at the time, and she tried to file off its smile. Here, Sasha works at making her first dolls in her studio. She loved children and she liked to create the ones she saw on the streets. During World War II, Switzerland, as a neutral zone, took in many refugees, especially children. Sasha was major volunteer, helping with the families and children, taking a group into her home. These especially were what she was trying to create to show their vulnerability, but also hope. Wax dolls were very early dolls she worked with and preceded the studio doll. Sasha was experimenting with different materials in which to create dolls that children could play with. Studio dolls were done from 1940 until 1975. The later ones also being part of Sasha's teaching others to do the dolls. She numbered the faces and bodies used. Then they were recorded on the doll's foot. For instance, if a body C was used with a type 2 head, it would be marked C2 plus other numbers to tell what the doll was. The studio dolls are the ones that developed into the first manufactured dolls. Very few people actually own a studio doll, and many are fragile and not up to traveling around. The eyes on the dolls were another trial and error exercise to find the ones liked best. This photo of a studio doll with the later manufactured Sasha's clearly shows how much larger the studio doll was. The type A body was cloth. The legs and arms were added or sewn onto the body. These dolls were unmarked and often later used for the studio dolls made by students of Morgenthaler. The dolls were unmarked. Another unmarked doll was the type B. The bodies were jointed using leather or wooden discs. The arms were protected using felt lining. Where type A and B bodies were made of cloth, the C bodies were made of different materials. From 1940 to 1960, it was fiber reinforced gypsum. Synthetic molding materials were 1950 to 1970, and molded bodies were developed in the mid-1940s. These dolls were marked on the bottom of one foot. Also, the hands were no longer just mittens, but much better developed. To the left is shown the markings on the bottom of the foot of the C body. The face 3 is pictured next to the body. The doll was beginning to look like the commercial Sashas that collectors are familiar with. On to one of my favorite parts about the Sasha doll is the clothing. These are costumes created for the studio dolls. Sasha made the clothing her studio dolls wore. These three are dressed in clothing she used later with the commercial dolls. Dolls like these were sold in local stores near where Tasha lived. The yoke dress seen on 4 of her studio dolls would later become iconic to the clothing that was used for the female dolls. Gingham, in particular, seen on the right, was a popular fabric used in all colors. Even today, seamstresses who sell Sasha clothing on Etsy often use this style dress. Sasha wanted her dolls to be available to a wider range of children and not only affordable by wealthy parents, but also who were not rich as well. A group that was sporting well-made toys for all children learned of Sasha's dreams. She and the toy maker Hans Gotz were introduced, and on May 11th, 1964, a license between Morgenthaler and Gotz was signed. The dolls produced were marked with tags used earlier on the studio doll, but with the word Siri on them. This meant the doll was being produced in a factory. The very early manufactured Sashas had no visible mold line in the middle of the torso. These dolls, around 1,000, did not meet Morgenthaler's high standards. Even though they were not shipped to the Swiss market, some made their way to European stores. The largest amount of German dolls do have the mold mark. The earlier of these dolls have navels, where the ones from 1969 to 1970 did not. All the dolls were 16 inches in height. Different face sculpts were used along with hair color and style. The earlier hair was made of a material that made it stiff and hard to manage. I have an early doll and her bangs sink straight out like boy number 2. I can do nothing with them. Girl 6 seems to have this problem also. Some of the other dolls here seem to have better hair like number 3 and 5. The hair was rooted, but one way the company saved money was to make the hair spacier. Most of the German Sashas were dressed in red, white, and blue, as seen in the photo on the upper left. However, the iconic princess's dress, upper right, made in all colors, and as seen in the bottom right, some things were green and black. The underwear came ribbed, A, and C shows with underpants that usually matched the dresses. Petticoats were under some dresses. The shoes that went with the outfits that Sasha wore were reflections of the times. Morgenthaler, as an artist, had never dealt in manufacturing and so put demands on the Gotz company, and they in turn had never dealt with an artist. In order to produce a doll of the quality Morgenthaler wanted, plus keep the cost down, production had to be cut in ways that weren't noticed. Sometimes the body parts were made from lesser materials, etc. Morgenthaler wasn't happy. While still working with Gotz, Morgenthaler was approached by the Fido Ltd, asking to allow the English company to manufacture Sasha. The owners had seen the doll in a Swiss magazine and were convinced they wanted to do the doll. Gotz had a 7-year contract with Morgenthaler and produced for 5. A custody suit was filed. Meanwhile, the Fido company was free to do a more efficient production. It joined with Trendon in 1970. Dolls from the English company were strung with different elastic cord over time and done differently also. A Sasha doll can be dated by the elastic and the way it was attached. This is a way that many Sasha owners find the date their doll was manufactured. Having been working on becoming a judge for UFTC, I'm becoming very aware of the things a judge can't see and the importance of providing a card with information. This is an example where the owner could put the color of the cords, etc., to give a full description of their Sasha. The German body had its mold line more at the waist, where the English version was what was called a bikini line because it was below the navel. The earlier dolls were 15 and a half inches, ranging to 17 inches, but were always listed as 16 inches in height. And I have the arrow showing where the mold line showed. You can see that that's a bikini line. These are all the faces used by the English makers. Note that some of the faces are longer and some more round. Using the same hairstyle and color really shows the difference. Here are three of the faces separately. Number one shows the philtrum. The eye painting as well as the lips is light and is a good example of the earliest dolls. By 1968, the philtrum had been added, as seen in number two, and by 1970, the eyebrows, eyes, and lips were sprayed through masks. The 70s saw a lot less hand painting on the faces. The face was done with a temp paint machine in 1979, number three. Three is also the new lighter skin tone. Some of the hairstyles seen on the English dolls. The hair was rooted as the German hair was, but seems to be of a softer, more pliable nature and definitely looks fuller. The short hairstyle was only used in 1982. The English printing company used wrist tags to identify their Sasha dolls. The most familiar tags are the ones with a center red circle, Sasha written in it, surrounded by a white circle and then a blue one. These tags were used from 1968 until 1971. The plain red tag was only used for a year on exported dolls. Hair and eye combinations were many, as this chart shows, and often these combinations went with a particular clothing style. Most of the clothing seen on the dolls could be purchased separately. This is just a small sample of the large amount of clothing that was available for Sasha. What a lucky doll. The dark color for Cora and Caleb, plus close curly hair, was part of the Trendon offering. The Sasha doll was created by Sasha Morgenthaler as a doll for children, which it became with a series or manufactured dolls. What she couldn't know was adults would become collectors loving to dress, sew, pose, and play with them. The doll industry had learned to perfect the coloring of the vinyl and the molding. Realizing that there was a need for Sasha's to be juiced again after a decade, Gotts signed another license to manufacture Sasha for 7 more years. However, Gotts was now interested in that collector and the price was high. The body was marked with the series tag used before and the neck markings on the neck markings. The date of the manufacture written on the tummy was written in hand on special edition dolls. Stringing in the neck changed in 1997 as seen beside the unstrung Gregor. Babies haven't been mentioned in this presentation because that would have added at least another 30 minutes. However, here I would like to show the baby with the toddler that became a part of the late Gott's line. The toddler was only made for a very short time, which makes him difficult to find. And actually, the toddler is the baby, except that the legs are straight. The doll came in a heavy cardboard tube, and the tags were pretty much the same, except for the back that says Gott's on it. These pages are out of catalogs that show some of the clothing the dolls wore. This second German production is sometimes referred to as the fourth generation. So what's rare? Up in the upper corner on the left, that's an extra rare because it's a studio doll. It was original, one of a kind, hand painted by Morgenthaler. Identification along with logo. Then the very rare are dolls made in Morgenthaler's class called course dolls, and also the English prototypes, one of a kind, and they may never have been made. Rare are the Gotts Sasha dolls made by Puppenfabrik Hans Gotts, Germany, 1964 to 1970, and the hard to find Frito Sashas with 1966 no filter faces. Others made by the same company in mint condition, dolls in less than a quantity of 440 as the factory closed. And easy to find are any of the Trendens from 1970 to 85 in current German production. This is my big bibliography. One of them is out of order. I didn't realize that I had spelled it with a B, and I couldn't change it. I don't know why the program wouldn't allow me to, but it did. But I wanted to note that the number one book, Sasha Dolls, The History, and number three, Sasha Dolls, and that's with the series identification, came in a set of three. And the third book, which I didn't show here because it's strictly patterns, and it's the patterns of the clothing that was actually used on the dolls. So it makes it fun to sew for them. I think that's one of the really special parts of the Sasha doll is that she's got a huge wardrobe. And I went on Etsy just to see how many pages of doll clothing was still being made for the Sasha doll. And there was at least 10 pages. So you can still buy the clothing or you can make it yourself. And that's the end of the program.